Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Dev Talk Show on November 1st. So just 2 months left in this year, and we're back with Janky Camera. If you were here last time, you are familiar with Janky Camera, and last time Janky Camera went away by the end of the show. So I'm not sure don't know what's going on here. The self-produced show, our only production assistant is sleeping right there, and so he's not exactly monitoring the production quality. But thank you all for joining us. And how's it going, Rich? It's Friday.
It's going well. It's good to be Friday.
Yeah. Little overcast
it's been
where we're at, right? And
I'm sorry.
It's a little overcast where we're at, and we've reached the time of year where our school children are going in the dark because our time change here, not just in the U.S. but in this time zone, which is most of the U.S., but there's still some places that don't. If you really want to learn about the intricacies of daylight savings, you'll have to watch another podcast, and I'm sure it'll be a 10-hour show because it is a very
lot.
crazy thing, but it's a very interesting computer science topic as well. One that I certainly have not mastered, but we change our time tomorrow night. So we'll get a little bit of morning daylight versus extended after work hours daylight, although that was fading rapidly. So,
and I forget, does that catch us up with the rest of the world?
So I'd be very interested to hear what folks know, because as usual, Americans are a little bit less up to date on the rest of the world. I think we're the last daylight savings observer to go back, and we go back after the weekend after Halloween, which started, I don't know when it started, 15 years ago or something.
A few years ago, yeah.
A lot of people felt like it was a plot to keep Halloween like in business for candy or something like that. I mean, I think I will admit it feels a little late. But we also start pretty early. We start very early in March, and I mean, I'm a big fan. I know this could be a whole controversial topic, but I'm a big fan of the evening daylight for being able to do things. However, the United States is a pretty big geography, and it does not affect every part of it the same. So that's why you have a couple jurisdictions like Arizona just completely opts out. And I really don't know why they do it, but I would suspect that if I'm Arizonan, that I don't want it to be so darn hot so late in the evening. I know time is a relative construct, but still, it's just like, can we get the sundowns, earlier? It's all sort of pretend, but
right.
Anyways, here we are. It's the Dev Talk Show, not the Time Talk Show.
But time's an important topic, so and everybody, we're all impacted by it because we have global viewers. So it's stuff we have to keep in mind for certain things. So,
and managing time in your apps, I'm not qualified to talk about. There are some brilliant people, like I know John Skeet, who works on Noted Time. I've heard him on shows go into the intricacies of how time libraries not only have to be aware of the current rules and laws and time zones, but they also have to be aware of the past, because if you are trying to calculate some time span from the past to now, but it goes over some political change, well, the seconds still marched the same just because a country or a jurisdiction decided to jump ahead an hour. That didn't mean that it was an hour more of time. So your library has to know. And I never considered that. I just thought, wow, that's crazy.
And did you get into some of the more astrological impacts of that, right? Because sometimes there's a leap second because of, it's 365 and a quarter days, but then over so many, like I think it's 100 years, it's like an extra second or something that has to get. So there's all that kind of intricacy that happens in time when you go forward and backward in time to calculate things.
Yeah, I'll have to make sure I include this in the show notes, but somebody that I watch a lot, Nick Chapsis, just recently did, I'm talking just in the last few days, did in fact, let's talk about 3 days ago, and I'll make sure I get this video. We'll get this into the comments. He just talked about how if you want to measure time in your app, that don't do what might be the first thing that comes to mind, which is use date time UTC now and then take the time span between the two. He's like, no, that's not what you want to do. And we're not talking about using it for getting the time. We're talking for recording time. We're talking about using it to measure, like, hey, how fast is my implementation? So let me take 2 of these. And the reason why he said don't use it is because the date time class has to account for everything, including what you just said, things like leap seconds. So it actually is very slow at what it's doing, because we're not talking about a method, datetime UTC now, that's optimized for performance. It's optimized for correctness. And so instead he says, look, there's other stuff you should be using in .NET, including the stopwatch and stuff like that. And it was the kind of thing that I sort of knew, but I never had somebody explain so succinctly why using datetime.utc now was not, if what you're doing is measuring performance, is not the way to go. It was just something that I kind of just knew, but I never really deeply thought about why. So cool little thing. And we are going to, and it shouldn't take too long, we are going to deploy our code-named app. The code name is Orbital. It is going to be, there's not much to it right now if you've been following along. It's going to be a user group management site. But one of the first things we wanted to do was see, well, how do you create a project that's suitable for static web apps with Blazor? And so the answer there was a Blazor WebAssembly Standalone project, which is not something we concentrated too much on this show. We were using Blazor Web App. And Blazor Web App, this could be informative for a lot of people. Blazor Web App, even if you use Blazor WebAssembly, interactive WebAssembly, is still fundamentally a server deployment. There's still a server project and a client project, and you have to deploy that on a server. So that could be something like an Azure Web Apps. It could be IIS on your own data center. It could be Nginx on Linux in your own data center. Azure, could be Kubernetes. It could be all kinds of things. But it is not. What it is not. It is not a static set of pages that come to the browser and then the browser takes over, like you might be doing today with popular web frameworks like say Angular or React or something. So with those frameworks, it was very fashionable, and sometimes people are still doing this, to simply have files sitting on a web server, and that's all. There's no server-side processing, comes down to the browser takes over from there. So what we were doing was saying, well, how do we get that going with a particular service, the Azure Static Web App Service, and struggling a little bit on the last mile. So we should get all of that done today. So one thing that I want to start off with is there's Microsoft Learn content on Azure Static Web Apps. And I'm going to get that into our chat. It'll end up in the YouTube description as well. So let me get that on the screen for everybody. Okay, so here it is. And then, I believe that I might have read that StreamYard has a way for us to bundle these actions, maybe. That would be pretty cool, because then, we shifted over to the other side. Here we are with our Dev Talk Show branding.
Nice.
So this particular site on Learn, it is a series of videos, deploy websites to the cloud with Azure Static Web Apps. And you can see, because it's purple, I watched Dheeraj Bandaru's clip on doing a Blazor website. And then these are all other popular web frameworks that can be used static site only, like Angular, React, Vue, Next. I'm not going to say these are the only ones, but they're very popular. So this is great. This is great. Dheeraj has also been on the Azure Community Stand-Up, which let me see if I can find that real quick. That might be a great resource for folks if you aren't aware of this. It was one of those things that I was kind of aware, was being done. And
okay.
Let me see if I can find it here. So here is the Microsoft Azure Developers YouTube channel. And every so often we see community stand-ups for different product features. Like here's the Azure Community Apps, Azure Container Apps Community Stand-Up. Oh, look, I have this YouTube wanted me to finish watching the rest of that ice hockey video. So here's the Azure App Service Community Stand-Up. And if we continue further down, I think we will find they might be under live streams because I think they're all recorded live. Here it was. The Azure Data API Builder Community Stand-Up about static web apps. Because we've been talking about using this, right? This was only a month ago. And so this is a monthly stand-up that I think we're going to find is here's Jerry Nixon, who I recall Jerry Nixon from being very active in WPF days and maybe Silverlight days, really, really diving into that for the community. And here he is. I thought it was great to see him. It's just been a while since I've crossed paths with him virtually in videos and blogs and stuff. So there's a lot of these community stand-ups on the Azure Developers channel. I think it's pretty cool. So
yeah.
Let's see, what are we doing here? We're not deleting the resource group. That wasn't correct. This is my portal. What I want to do is I just want to show that we have an Azure Static Web App here. So let's start in the Azure portal real quick.
Yeah.
Last time we used Windows Terminal, and we did some of this to show using the AZ CLI. There's some commands that I know pretty well, like this just lists groups, but we did some other stuff too. We created groups. So like, I created a resource group with something like this. And then we created an Azure Static Web App with something like that. I mean, it seems a little wordy, but at AZ Static Web App create, what's the name of the app? What's the resource group? Which location, which region, Azure region, wanted the output as JSON. And just because I thought it was easier to look at in that particular instance. And that's all it takes to create a static web app. It doesn't really take anything more. Those two things, those two things will create it. There's nothing wrong with using the portal, but when you're ready to automate, you have to figure out what did the portal do?
Right.
So we have our app here. Now, the next thing we want to do is we need to go to our GitHub repository. And so it's in the TheDevTalkShow organization. Here it is. User group meeting organization. And so we know what we've shown so far is that if we build this and publish it, .NET publish, the target folder for that publishing, if we just run it locally in like a server, a live server, maybe extension from VS Code, it works. Purely static client side. But to deploy it, we can get some help from GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions, I think, has a workflow. There's a bunch of. What's really neat about GitHub Actions, I found, is it looks at your repository and starts trying to say, I think this is what you're trying to do. And it gives it a good run, I think. I think that's cool. But what I want to do is I want to say static web apps. And it's going to suggest this workflow. Deploy.
Just one.
Yeah, it's the only one that it suggested when I typed static web apps. It said deploy web app to Azure static web apps. That at least made the choice pretty easy, though.
Right.
So when you click configure, if you're new to GitHub Actions, what happens is in your GitHub repository, GitHub adds a .github folder and a workflows folder, and that's where the actions live. And the actions are in the form of YAML files, and they basically just say, here's what to do.
Yes.
This particular thing is called a workflow. The individual things to do, I think, is the correct name for them is actions. And that's why we're seeing in the marketplace suggesting actions.
Yeah. Yeah. Because coming from the Azure DevOps world, we kind of think of actions being basically what a pipeline did, right? A pipeline could build stuff, it could release stuff. But actually actions and workflows is probably more appropriate because they respond to more than just the triggers related to deploying or creating an environment. So you can create an action that is responding to somebody creating a new issue in your repo and do something related to that. Maybe you interrogate the information that's in there and that kicks off some other process or steps that happen. So it's not just related to the classic things we think of pipelines with continuous integration and continuous deployment.
Yeah. So let's see. I think I can collapse the help panel here so we can see all of this, and I'll zoom in just a little bit so we can get a little bit better view. There's a bunch of comments here to help you get started. And what I think is interesting is they even take you to some documentation and learn to create a Azure Static Web App. They say using vanilla JavaScript. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and open that just so we can peek real quick at what they're talking about. When you come here, build your first static web app using GitHub. And then what they're saying here is if no framework at all, it's just going to be like HTML. Or do you want Angular, or do you want Blazor, or do you want React, or do you want Vue?
Okay.
And while I thought these were pretty good, what I didn't know was this particular quick start, while it does work, there's nothing wrong with it as a quick start. It has you go to the portal and find your repo in the portal, which we were trying to do last time.
Right.
The problem with this approach, this approach works, and you will get a working. What happens is this approach is the portal and Azure Static Web Apps and whatever. This all works together to create a completed YAML file. The file's pointing to where you want it to go, and it just works. And I think that's great. But what happens to me, you know me, the same thing happened to me with Blazor authentication, is I said, I love that it just worked. How do I do this on my own? Like, what were the levers that made this go? So of course I want to find out what those are. Like I have to say, what was it, you know?
Yeah. And I think some of it is unique to static web apps itself, right? When static web apps first came out, there was almost a requirement that it had to live in some kind of a repository and then get pushed into static web apps, right? So it's a little different than doing a function, doing a container app, doing an app service, right? They were almost like meant to be together, such that they even, said, well, people do Azure DevOps too. So they made that hook as well. So you got the option.
Yeah, right. So what we're doing today is not the only way to do this, because I think, as you were just alluding to, we could instead have a GitHub action or just any workflow in any kind of build system that produces a container, and then we could say, okay, that is correct, right? Yeah, I think we could produce a container and use that in static web apps. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know about that, because that container is going to have to run somewhere, right?
Yeah, I was just trying to think. I know there's more. Oh no, I know what it is. It's that I was thinking about the data API. I'm sorry. I was thinking about the data API. Because I was watching how the data API, you can build a container and deploy that. You're not necessarily beholden to any particular thing. So you're right. So static web apps has to get the files from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So let's strike what I said there. I was zooming ahead.
Yeah.
But there's an interesting conundrum where if you're doing a truly vanilla app, then it's just files to copy.
Yeah.
Blazor WebAssembly, there's a build step because you're building the DLLs that are going to be published to the site that run in Blazor WebAssembly. And even when you're using modern JavaScript frameworks today, they very often have a build step now. That is not, I really feel like most JavaScript front-end developers using even the most popular frameworks aren't just sending a bunch of client files directly to the server. Even if it's a client-side app, there's some build step. There might be bundling going on. There's even like, I don't want to just say bundling and minifying, but even just some optimization build steps that I'm seeing that need to be run. So if you're not familiar at all with GitHub Actions, the workflow is broken into these different categories. Like here's the name of the workflow, and then here is what triggers the workflow. For example, a push to main or a pull request to main. And then you can set some variables that you might use later in the workflow. But this is the heart of the workflow. Here are the jobs. And the job, you declare a job, and then you say, here are the steps for the job. This right here is using an action.
Yep.
So this action says, go check out the code. Pretty easy. Yeah. This is the one that makes the magic happen. This static web apps deploy job. And it wants to know a few things. It wants your static web apps token, which is a secret containing the API token for the app. It's not the only way to do this, but it's certainly a very easy way to do it, so to speak. It wants what's called your repos token. Now, you don't have to go find this or set this. This is automatically generated by GitHub. The secrets.github token automatically generated and automatically generated on each run. So, yeah, and I just read that in documentation. That's all. I didn't actually.
Interesting.
I didn't know about that until I literally said, where do I find this?
Where do you get this? Yeah.
Where do I get this? And it's like, oh, don't worry about it. It's automatically. Okay, fine. But these values are configured to tell static web apps how to build your app and where to find the output of that build. If build is necessary, because maybe you don't have a build, so you just leave application blank. API location is where you can set up where it will find APIs such as Azure Functions, which we are not using yet, but it'll deploy all of that.
Okay.
So that'll be really interesting to look into, I think. And that's really it. That's the whole workflow. The rest of this is okay, well, if it's a pull request, let's make sure we close the pull request. Okay, fine. That's not really part of what we're doing here. What we want to do is we want to deploy. So what I found is I had to make sure these values were correct.
And where did you get those values from?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like if I do nothing more than commit this right now, create Azure Static Web App YAML, commit it to the main branch. Because we have committed and that's a new commit, I go to Actions. It's going to try doing it. It's going to go for it.
Push to the main branch. Yes.
Yep. Push to the main branch because we declared in that workflow. And so there it goes. It is off and running. This takes a couple minutes though, but it won't take it that long to fail, I think, because what's going to happen is static web apps deploy is going to say, hold on a second. I couldn't figure out what you wanted me to do. And the reason that it can't do that, I was wondering if it was going to fail quickly while we were here. It might not. Oh, wait, here it goes. There it is. I saw some red.
Mm-hmm.
I saw some red. So that always tells us failed to find a default file in the app artifacts folder, which right now it's saying is just the root, and a valid default file would be index.html. So it says I didn't find one of those. So you might want to check your app location variable and said, okay, great. Awesome. So what we want to do is go back to the code and go back to the workflow and go back to the YAML file. The way this particular workflow is set up is the environment variables are saying location of the client code, and that's where it looked for an index.html, and it couldn't find it.
Yeah.
We didn't get this far for the optional API source code, and then we didn't get this far. Where is the client code output? So real quick, let me take a detour on the Azure Static Web Apps token. In your Azure Static Web App, in the portal, there is Manage Deployment Token. If I click this right now, it's going to show me the token.
Okay.
I copy that, head back over here I go to Settings. You go to Secrets and Variables, and this is settings in your repository, Secrets and Variables, and it's not going to show me the secret. I switch to Actions, and it's going to say, yep, a little bit earlier, you came in and created a repository secret with that name that the workflow wants, and you put the secret in there.
Yep.
So it's just a bunch of, it's a big, long token.
Yeah. And you can update that token, but once it's in the secrets, you can't see it anymore.
Right.
So it is effectively secret.
Right. Okay. So that had to be set. The issue here is that if we go look at the source code for Orbital, which I happen to have on my system, in fact, I have it open in code. So let's just go there. It might be a little easier to look at. If we go to orbital.web, the CS.proj file is sitting here in orbital.web. It's not in the root.
True.
Okay, and so we need to let it know where do you find the project file? That is going to be the app location. That's a little different. Yeah, go ahead.
It's the project file and not where that index.html is located.
So app location seems to serve multiple purposes.
Okay.
If you are truly vanilla and there's an index.html file there, and you can use app location there because you don't have a build step.
Gotcha.
And it picks it up and it says, yep, I saw an index.html. Let's go.
Okay.
But we have a build step because this is a Blazor app.
Right.
And like any good user of source control, we have a gitignore file that is ignoring the publish or bin, all of the deployment of the build artifacts of my working locally. That's not here.
Yeah.
So there is no publish folder in here with the latest ready to go code. That's just not here. So we need to change our action slightly, change our workflow. And what we're going to do is we're going to say that app location. So we're going to say drop down a folder. What happened? It might not. Let's see. What did I do? I think what I did is I'm not editing it.
Did you go into edit mode?
Yeah. So let's click edit this file. Change the app location to orbital.web. And so just to close the loop, why orbital.web? Let's go back to the project. The root folder is Orbital. It's sitting one subfolder below in orbital.web. And there it is. This is the CS.proj file. And the static web apps action is smart enough to recognize, oh, it's Blazor, it's .NET. You don't have to tell it that. I was kind of looking around. Do I have to tell it it's Blazor? Maybe you can do that, but I didn't have to. I didn't have to do anything else. So, well, at least in terms of app location. But now that we build the app artifact location, it's going to go looking for a build folder. And it's going to be very disappointed. So I need to tell it, well, we actually will have the output sitting in www root.
Okay.
And so once you make those two changes, after you create a Blazor WebAssembly standalone app, after you make those 2 changes, then well, I think that's it. That's all we have to do. The rest of it, these environment variables are being used down here. So just for completeness, theoretically, I could have come here and just coded that right there. I could have just put orbital web right there in application, and I could have just put www root right there, and I could have left this like as a blank string. And in fact, if you follow this video and have the portal do it for you, that's what the portal does. The portal just drops it right in, which is fine. There's really nothing. I honestly don't think that's not horrible. This just makes it kind of nice because, once again, being an environment variable, you can now manage that at a different level. You could manage it here in this repository. You could manage it organizationally. So that's all.
I think you can even do it with a file, right? And have it.
I think like command line. Yeah, right. Yeah. It could be like, hey, at the command line, you could say, here, go deploy this Azure Static Web App, but I have different information for you, or, so.
Yeah, override with this. Yeah.
So I commit this, and I'm going to say with Blazor WASM standalone. This is going to be a nice long comment. Based variables. I don't know. It's probably too big. Update. I'm going to just drop this to workflow. I know there's a limit on how long is an optimal get message. I don't have that memorized though. No. We'll do that. We'll commit directly to the main branch. And now that we go back and look at the code, we can see this workflow was updated. We've got I can even click on it's going to show us what we did. We added those 3 things. Now let's hope that I have not forgotten anything. Update workflow with Blazor WASM standalone based variables. It is working on it. When I timed this, it took approximately 3 minutes to complete everything. So right now it's just doing the first step where it is it's actually building the container that's going to run the workflow. We're not even at our first step. Well, now we are, which is checking out. Hold on, I'm getting a call here. So we've checked out the repository. Now we're in the middle of build and deploy.
Mm-hmm. So while this is going, since this is going to take a few minutes to do, the only thing that lets our GitHub action have the permissions to do what we want it to do is that API token, so it can talk securely to the static web app. That's it.
Yeah, the token in this particular setup that we're doing right now, the token is the big deal. That was pulled from right here so I'm in the static web app in the portal. This isn't the only way to get it. I could write a script to grab it, but if I click on this right now, it's going to show the token. So that's why I'm not clicking on it. If we were not live, I would very happily show it in a video and then just go change it, right? Or kill the app or whatever.
Blur it or whatever.
Because by the time people run off to say like, oh, I'm going to take over his site, it's like, aha,
And Azure Mask won't protect you on that one, I guess.
It might. I don't know that I want to try that live.
I'm with you.
It might protect it just fine. So as you can see, a bunch of stuff's going on right now. In fact, it's using .NET 9 for it, whatever. It's not a big deal.
Well, I think it had the project file. So.
It might be that the project file is .NET 9, yeah. And in fact, what is it saying that it's done? It's installed the workload. It's figured out, published to the directory. And now it is pointing out, hey, I didn't find an API, so I didn't create any Azure functions. And finished upload. That feels pretty good. There's even, let's see if I don't know that we're going to see very clearly, but it ran the .NET build ran. Looks like this says it was done in 110 seconds. That's great.
2 minutes, yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah, still going though. There's still a little bit more to do. This is it. That's what I was looking for right here. I even love how the message has a smiley face in it. Isn't that cool? So visit your site. That's awesome. Now,
Thankful Pond. There you go.
Yeah. So again, that static web app was given just a fake URL to get going. Custom URLs we'll look at another time. But let's go check that out. Thankful Pond, and look at that. That is a Blazor WebAssembly Standalone web app, just to prove that it was really our app and not like the default. I changed
The default.
a tiny bit of code. Didn't change much. If I go back to the code and let's see, Orbital Web, and we go to Pages and home.razor. Here it is.
Yeah.
So
all that works.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was curious what you're going to say next.
So here's what I'm thinking, right? So all this works, and if you're in your development environment, that's great because you've got access to those things, right? Everything you did, I can go to the portal, I can pull those things apart. You may not as you get to other environments.
Sure.
And right. I'm wondering if there is a way for us to get that API token maybe from the CLI.
Yeah, exactly. And you know me, I when we were here last time, we created, let's see, we have a resource group, and we even created the static web app just with something like this. And so let's do this. I'm not 100% sure if you can get the token, and if we get it, then I'll just have to change it, which is no big deal.
I mean, if you do it as a dummy one, we'll just go back and do it as a separate application, and we'll just delete it.
Yeah, right. So let's do some basic things to get that started. We're going to create a new resource group, and we're going to call this test TDTS, just because I just want it to be different. I'm setting variables here because that way I can keep using those same command lines without having to go and tweak the command lines.
Right.
So let's call this, once again, let's call this test TDTS.SWA. And step 1 is going to be to create the group. So let's do that real quick. This AZ group creating a new resource group with those parameters above. It's already done. That was really quick. I'm going to scroll back up to just see the list. Here it is. List is there. Now we need a new static web app. So that is this command. And feel free to pause if you're watching in the future. AZ static web app create, giving it the name with our variable, resource group with our variable. This all works in Bash too, if you haven't watched our previous shows. This all works great in Bash, very similar. Everything's very similar. Okay, now, see, just we don't see slashes. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Just flip the slashes.
Oh, yeah. Flip slashes. A couple other things too. The way you define the variable might be a little different.
Right.
Now, there is a command called AZ static web app show that we're going to run next. And you provide the static web app in the resource group. And I'm going to get rid of this query just so we can look at everything that comes back. And let's look at it. Let's look at it in JSON form. I think that might be easier to go over.
I think so.
I'm wrong. Now, as far as a token goes, interesting, repository token. So I don't think we're seeing it here, but that doesn't mean it can't be done.
Right.
I am thinking that what we do is we start interrogating let's start interrogating the help. And we have show details of an app, manage deployment token for the static app. That's looking better. So let's say AZ, what was it? It was AZ static web app secrets, and let's do a help on that. Okay. Manage deployment token for the static app list. Right. So I think we can get this. What I'm wondering is, do I need it to have, instead of show,
it should be list
secrets, I think.
Yeah, sorry.
But what this isn't showing me is, do I need to specify this other stuff. Maybe I do, but I feel like it's
I think
list.
so. Yeah, otherwise it's not going to know.
So let's give this a try and see what we get. And there it is.
API key.
That's it. Yeah, that's absolutely it. And so what I can do now is I can use that query, which I'm going to forget how to do it. So let me go find one of my examples.
It's just query and then the property in quotes.
I think that it's just going to be properties.api key, like you said.
Good point.
And now we're just going to get that answer.
Nice.
And so I could theoretically, like let's say I'm writing a script there, that'll give me the answer. I can go maybe we write some more GitHub CLI code to add it to the action, or no, that's not. We could call the action and pass this as the secret. I think we could do that.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, granted, that API key is going to let anybody they want deploy. So it looks like we have the power to use a different, what was it called? It was reset API key. And that should change it. And I don't think it's going to show it to us. Yeah, so it's done. In fact, I might as well just double check and see that it's different. Yep. And then I'll reset it again. Yeah, I'll reset it. But I just want to show that it works, right?
No, sure. That's cool.
So
I know we're kind of running up against time here.
Yeah.
But the reason, so thinking about why this is important, in that you might have your GitHub action that needs to deploy this no longer in development where I have access to the API key, but in test or prod where I don't. And you could then, because the reason we have to go down this path is because the static web app action, and you can go to, I think maybe I'll drop it in the chat so you have it. Because if you go to github.com, just like in a different browser.
Okay. Open the browser by creating.
And then go to Azure.
You're saying I should go to the portal or go
/ Azure.
Oh, I gotcha. I see what we're doing. We're going to the Azure
and then do / static web apps with the dashes in between. Dash deploy, sorry.
Okay, so a little bit more. Yeah?
Dash deploy.
Oh, dash deploy. Sorry.
That's okay.
I gotcha. So because that's the name of the action, right?
Exactly. So
yeah,
if you go to the GitHub Marketplace and for the actions, there's a direct link to this. So, I'm walking Chris through, doing the URL bit.
Well,
but the idea,
I think that's a standard for workflows, right? Is that if you name based on your organization and the repository, and you can drop your own custom work action in here, and it's like, whatever, I'll pick it up.
Yeah, I can, as long as I can see it. It's not a private repo.
Yep.
It should be able to access it. So the point of that is this action YAML defines all of the properties essentially that are inside of there. So if you click on that, you can scroll through and see all the things that you could change. The first couple in there are required. The things, the action YAML.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I see.
And then,
I see.
So the action is required, the location is required, the static API token, those are all things required. There's nothing in here that lets us swap out an authentication method like the API token and say, well, just use, I've logged into the Azure CLI. Let me do that and use the token that gets created from that. So because of that, we're thinking of a different way to get to that data, which is log in via the Azure CLI with some kind of a secure account that has permissions in that portal, and then be able to go and query that object to then get back your API token and use that when you go to run it. I mean, the other way to do is also to put that API token inside of a key vault and then just reference the key vault. So
there's several ways you could go. I mean, I happen to be pretty nimble with the AZ API, but it's not the only way.
No.
But okay, so I feel like what you're saying here is that the Azure Static Web Apps deploy action is going to use the deployment token, and that's its only way to do it.
That's the only way to do it, yes.
Now, what we've been kicking around but maybe are not sure about is whether there's any other way, using like a service principal. Maybe there isn't. I don't know. I guess we can find out.
Well, so there's no other way to authenticate that action.
Okay.
Which is the problem. And as we saw, there was only one action when we talk about static web apps. So unless there's a way for us to, like, if we go back and look at the AZ command that you were kind of going through where you found the secrets, right? And is there a way to do a deployment off of the AZ command for static web apps? I'm guessing there is not. Or at least not one that doesn't also require the API token.
Right. I mean, we can look for that too.
Mm-hmm.
So, but to your point, we're trying to find not just the automated path, which I like to do, but what's the automated path that an organization could use where being in development doesn't mean you have privy or access to any special secrets. In fact, you might not really want anybody to. It's all automated. The production environment can get the deployment token. It can reset it if it wants to. Reset it, grab it, deploy with it. Heck, it can even reset it again. And I don't know necessarily what the value is in that, other than just saying nobody can rerun this particular instance. And not that any of this would be in logs, but that secret shouldn't be in any logs or anything. But anyways.
Yeah. I mean, it could if it comes over via a CLI call, right? So you'd probably want the ideal way to do it is to put it in a key vault and then use the Azure authentication to access the key vault and then drop that in as the variable in that space. That's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, I'm still not an app that's dazzling us, but I will say what's kind of nice is this is a total standalone app. If we look at the project file, we'll see that this isn't what we were used to with Blazor Interactive WebAssembly, where there would have been an Orbital Web project and an Orbital Web.client project. We're not seeing that. This is 100% client-side Blazor with a very small program CS that really doesn't do a whole lot more other than figure out your app root component and plop it in the app. I mean, we can even find this in index.html. It's going to replace this div right here. When it's ready to go, it replaces this loading, and then there's your app. There's your app. That's it. So
cool. Now we got to do some fun stuff with it.
Yeah. Now, I mean, we're still at that beginning. I think another very early piece that we'd probably like to tackle is just being able to authenticate. Whether or not we do anything special with it, there's going to be a difference between whether a group administrator is in there editing and adding to the calendar and somebody who's just there anonymously to view it.
Right.
So getting that in as early as possible will be nice. And what will also be nice is that I've never explored the authentication path in two ways here. Number one, it's the Blazor WebAssembly Standalone to learn. And number two, what Static Web Apps provides, because my understanding is Static Web Apps itself is helping with this. I don't exactly know how to say it more than that because I haven't reviewed it that much, but it's helping provide some of the we'll have to see what that means. I haven't, more to learn. That's why we're
here. So cool. Excellent. Good stuff.
Yeah. So, hey, if you're watching now live, we really appreciate you watching live. And if you watch in the future, this episode, I would hope, feels like a real complete and pretty compact viewpoint of how do I deploy this with GitHub Actions. And it's for the kind of person who, maybe you watched the same video I did and you said, that's great. The portal's great, but I don't want to use, I want to start productionizing this, to use that pretend word. How do I do it? And that's kind of what we're heading down. Is we want, one of the things that I think I'm definitely really strive for on our show is, how do we take this to work? Let's go beyond the tutorial and the demo, which are awesome to learn, but now I really want to use this. So
yeah,
awesome.
Cool.
Well, it's almost stand up here. Yeah, it's almost stand up here Eastern time zone in the US. So we're going to get moving. There will be, I'll get back to the YouTube description for some of the documents and the repo. We'll get all of that in there. So if you're watching it really close to when we ended, it may not be there yet, but it should be there by this afternoon. And then you can go check out what we did. So
nice. Good stuff, Chris.
Right. Well, thanks for joining today, Rich. And we are planning to be back next Wednesday, I believe.
Yes.
So that's the current plan. And we'll have some more cool stuff to talk about. If there's anything you'd like us to talk about, please, if there's anything you think that might be fun to explore, drop it in the comments on YouTube. You can always reach us on Twitter. It's at TheDevTalkShow, or X, or whatever that's called now. And you can see we're on Twitch and YouTube. And there is even a LinkedIn site that I don't have the URL ready for. I really need to have that. But that's it. So I think we'll get moving. For Rich, I'm Chris Gomez, and we will see you next time on the Dev Talk Show. Oh, look at that.